Thank you. And now I would like to take questions from you.
Now the ambassador is ready to take questions. Let's start with Joyce Napier from CTV.
Hello, Ambassador. Thank you so much for taking our questions. You spoke of improving relationships with Canada and mutual respect. I'm wondering why Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig got consular access this past weekend after months without any consular access. You are a signatory to the Vienna Convention that gives prisoners access to consular visits. You also have a bilateral agreement with Canada that gives your prisoners and Canadian prisoners access to consular visits once a month. So I'm wondering, in the case of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, why you have not respected those two agreements that you have signed.
You know, the two Canadian citizens you mentioned, they had been prosecuted because they had been suspected being engaged in activities endangering national security of China. The competent authorities in China are handling the cases independently and according to law. And at the same time, we are doing what we can within our legal system to ensure their lawful rights. So we have been honoring the Vienna Convention and the relevant bilateral agreements between China and Canada. And the only reason that the consular access had been suspended for a while, it was because of the raging COVID-19. And that's not targeted against Canada. And it's a practice to ensure the health and the safety of the persons concerned. So it demonstrates of our great responsibility. So recently, at the request of the Canadian side, and on the basis of mutual respect, and as the situation gets better for the prevention of the virus, so we made the consular access, to take place again. So that's, I think demonstrates once again, we are protecting the lawful rights of those Canadian citizens.
Yes, thank you for that answer. But with all due respect, according to these two conventions that you have signed, Canada does not have to ask you, and it is not a concession for you to give consular access to your prisoners. It is part of those agreements that you have yourself, your country has signed. My question is then, what exactly are the charges against these two men? You say they're endangering the security of your country, but is there, or have you any dates? Have you any time that they may have endangered? Any details about the charges that were laid against Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig? Thank you.
The facts had been clear and it has been released by the relevant authorities. So I would like to refer you to the all those fact sheets. And as for the judicial process, the competent authorities will be continuing to handling the cases according to law and in an independent way. So the process will be unfold, in due course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question, Mr. Robert Fife from the Globe and Mail.
Thank you for holding this news conference. You say that Canada is the fault for the basically the freeze in relations between China and Canada, but the Prime Minister said this week that it is China's coercive diplomacy, its treatment of arbitrary arrest, its repression in Hong Kong, its treatment of the Uyghurs that are responsible for bad relations, and that he is going to be working with other allies to try to get China off of this path that he says is very unproductive?
You know, we oppose any remarks that interfere in our internal affairs. And I would like to point out there's no coercive diplomacy on the Chinese side. As I mentioned earlier, those 2 Canadian citizens had been prosecuted because they were suspected of engaging in activities which endanger our national security. And on the part of Montreal incident, the Canadian side abused the bilateral extradition treaty and detained Madame Meng while she was breaking no Canadian law at all. So that's the compulsory measures. That's the arbitrary detention. And for us, the Hong Kong issue and the Xinjiang related issue are not internal, are not about the issues of human rights. They are purely the internal affairs of China, which brooks no interference from the outside. So for Hong Kong, I think after the implementation of the national security law for the past 3 months and a half, Hong Kong is becoming more stable and safer. And that's had been widely recognized by the vast majority of the Hong Kong residents. And for the Xinjiang, I think over the past 4 years, there has been no single terrorist incident. And that's a major achievement compared to the years between 1990 and 2016, which seen a lot of terrible incidents happening, causing a lot of innocent lives. So what we are doing there is to ensure that we take measures to address both the root causes and those issues at surface for countering terrorism. And we have achieved a great lot. And that's also conducive to the international fight against terrorism. Thank you.
Ambassador, I have a follow-up question. Canada has started to accept refugees from Hong Kong, which is implicitly showing that it lacks faith in your legal and judicial system as a result of the imposition of the national security law. And just a few moments ago, more than 45 MPs and senators have called on the Canadian government to do more to accept Hong Kong citizens who are concerned about the repression that is going on in Hong Kong. What do you have to say to that, sir?
We strongly urge the Canadian side not grant so-called political asylum to those violent criminals in Hong Kong, because it's the interference in China's domestic affairs, and certainly it will embolden those violent criminals. So if the Canadian side really cares about the stability and the prosperity in Hong Kong, and really cares about the good health and the safety of those 300,000 Canadian passport holders in Hong Kong, and a large number of Canadian companies operating in Hong Kong SAR, you should support those efforts to fight violent crimes, those efforts to make sure that the one country, 2 systems is more steadily and comprehensively implemented in Hong Kong. And that is exactly what the national security law in Hong Kong SAR is meant to be. So I would like to suggest that people here take an objective and fair view of what's happening in Hong Kong, and to make sure not to interfere in those domestic affairs of China, so as to prevent further damage to our bilateral relationship.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
the next question, Mr. Li Baodong from Xinhua News Agency.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for the event. So I have two questions. And then recently, some polls by the research bodies in Canada and the United States showed Canadians' negative opinion on China has risen. And what's your view and comment on the polls? And this year marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between China and Canada. In serious difficulty of the two countries now. So what new cooperations will China and Canada can carry out? Thank you.
You know that for those so-called negative attitudes towards China in some certain countries in the West, first I would like to suggest those people cannot represent the whole part of the Western countries because the survey was taken in just a few of the Western countries. And also they cannot represent the opinion of the international community as a whole. So if you approach the issue from a wide range, you will see that actually what we are doing over the years, our domestic policy, our foreign policy have been widely recognized by the vast majority of the international community. And they are spoken highly about China's achievements in economic and social development and China's contribution to the world peace and the stability. And also back in China, I think a lot more Chinese people, they have the best say as to what China looks like today. And it's interesting to note that recently there are two numbers coincides, 93%. According to one of the Ipsos poll recently, 93% of the Chinese people feel happy. And that's a big increase over the last year. And also that number tops all the other countries. And also according to a study by the JFK School of the Harvard University, more than 93% of Chinese people feel satisfied when it comes to the support of the central government. So it demonstrates that the Chinese people are in the best position to judge its policies. And I would like to suggest that actually it is the United States who is now drawing a wide range of criticism from the international community. And it's on the wrong side of the trend of the times and the wrong side of the history. It is evident that last month there was a voting for the resolution in the United Nations about response to COVID-19. So the vast majority, 169 countries, voted in favor of the resolution, while only the United States and another country voted against. So you could tell who is on the right side of the history. And as to your second question, I believe that even though we are encountering difficulties currently, still there's broad space for cooperation, not only bilaterally, like trade and investment. And I would like to suggest that even against the backdrop of the COVID-19, the commodity export from Canada to China had increased for the first 8 months of this year by 2.5%, while the Canadian commodity export to the world had been on a downturn. It was reduced by more than 15%. So it demonstrates that the high-level development in China can bring more opportunities for our two countries. And also, as I suggest, there are a lot we can do together in a multilateral institution. Whenever it's a climate change or environmental protection, which bears upon the development of humankind. So I think still there's a broad prospect for what we can do. But of course, to unleash the great potential of the cooperation, the Canadian side should make the right decision and to resolve the Madame Meng's incident properly to release her as soon as possible, so to clear the obstacle for our bilateral relationship. Thank you.
Okay, our next question, Mr. David Battistelli from Omni Television.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and apologies that my camera is not functioning this morning. My first question, will you guarantee the release of the two Michaels should the extradition case against Meng fail?
You know, as we always point out, that the cases of those two Canadian citizens and the incident of Meng Wanzhou, they are not related. For Madame Meng, she has broken no Canadian law, but she was under a detention. It was a very serious political incident. Even the documents released by the Canadian side suggest that your law enforcement agency has recognized the high political nature of the incident. And for the two Canadian citizens, I have earlier mentioned and emphasized on the nature of the cases involved. Of course, I would like to stress that a proper settlement of Madame Meng's incident, an early release of Madame Meng and her safe return to China certainly helps our bilateral relationship back onto right track, and it will be conducive to our long-term development. Thank you.
My second question, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My second question is regarding the recent language that's been used. Bob Fife mentioned the coercive diplomacy. We had the defense minister talking about hostage diplomacy the other day. The Chinese Foreign Affairs spokesperson called Canada hypocritical and weak. Has Canada-China relations, have they hit rock bottom? And where do they go from here?
Of course, we are encountering severe difficulties, and the reason is only because of the Meng Wanzhou incident. And I would like to suggest the United States acts like a troublemaker for our bilateral relationship. So hopefully, the Canadian side will take right decision and to remove the interference from third party and to address the issue of Madame Meng properly. And also, I would like to point out, for all those remarks which painted China as the one who is engaged in the hostage diplomacy, they are totally wrong. They are baseless accusations against the Chinese side. As I mentioned earlier, that the incident of Madame Meng is plotted by the United States. And that's the main reason for our relationship currently encountering the difficulties. So I think it's the time for the Canadian side to make the right decision. And also I have noted an increasing number of insightful people here in Canada. They have voiced reasonable views about how to settle the Meng's incident. And on top of the 19 prominent figures, more recently, more than 100 retired diplomats here in Canada wrote a letter to the Canadian government, asking the government to step in and to end the process and to release Madame Meng. So it is hope that the government here will reflect on those rational voices. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question, Mr. Mike Blanchfield from the Canadian Press.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Good to see you again. I want to ask a couple questions about processes in China, your legal system, trying to understand it. It's widely understood that China has really done a great job combating the coronavirus. There aren't a lot of restrictions anymore. So why is it necessary to continue to not allow in-person visits under the Vienna Convention? It seems like you've got the situation under control. Is there something we don't know about that? And we're going on 2 years of these two men in prison. They haven't been arraigned in a court. We haven't seen them in a courtroom. Can you explain the length of time it's taking your judicial system to follow through on these charges that you talk about?
Of course, in China, we are making great progress in containing the virus. And that exactly is because of the unique advantage of our system, and also with the joint efforts of the people, nationwide. And at the same time, as regard to your question about the consular access, as I mentioned earlier, it's not against the Canadian side. It is taken because we have to make sure that the risks being reduced, to the greatest extent for the people concerned when it comes to the good health and the safety. And as you can understand, for those facilities, the detention centers, there's a high risk. And it's not only in China, but elsewhere, in Canada and in other countries, they took extra measures when it comes to the preventing virus, containing virus. And for the legal process, as I mentioned, it will be unfolded in due process. So the relevant judicial authorities in China will continue to handle those cases independently and according to law, and at the same time to ensure the lawful rights of these Canadian citizens. And there's some hyping up about so-called mistreatment, but they are baseless. For example, the report suggested that the reading glasses of those citizens had been taken aside, but there's nothing like that. So we would urge the Canadian side to have an objective reading of what's happening there and to see that we are doing what we can within our legal system for those cases. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. My follow-up question is, Canada is widely pursuing other countries to help out with the release of the two Michaels, as they're known here. The recent China European Union summit, the final communique from the European Union made reference to this. Michael Kovrig's employer regularly tweets about his fate and says that his continued incarceration is a stain on China's international reputation. What are you going to do to manage this perception of China that is growing, that Canada is fueling, and what do you think about that?
First of all, there's no use for Canadian side trying to get up other countries for putting pressure on China. It will be doomed to fail, because I think the nature of the cases are quite clear. And secondly, I think it's just a small patch of the so-called Western countries sending out those voices. And if you look at the vast majority of the international community, they respect the judicial sovereignty of China, the legal system in China. And for those general public in the Western countries, we do hope that we will be having more objective reading, as I mentioned earlier, about the situation in China. So there's nothing like mistreatment. This is just groundless accusations against China. So these kind of fact-distorting reports, they actually stir up all those negative readings of China. So we do hope that people will stop spreading those lies and baseless reports. Thank you.
Next question, Mr. Dang Sheng from CCTV.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Good morning. My question is that about 3 weeks ago, the Canadian Ambassador, Dominic Barton, called for greater ties with China on the forum. As he said, the weight of the world is shifting and has shifted toward Asia. Canada need to do more in China. But to be frankly, his voice is too weak among some Canadian politicians' hardline remarks against China. And how do you look at the current standoff between our two countries? And also, what can we expect the future of bilateral relationship? Thank you.
You know that I think when I reaching out to the general public here in Canada, my impression is still that the majority of them are interested in seeing a healthy and stable development of bilateral relationship. And a lot of them have come to realize that the China's development are beneficial to the future of Canada because it provides a huge market to the Canadian commodities, the services of Canada. And also they are in favor of educational and cultural exchange. I was talking to a lot of presidents of the universities here in Canada. They all express willingness to welcome more Chinese students coming this way to study here. And if you can just look at the numbers, more than 200,000 students from China here in Canada. And in the province of Nova Scotia alone, 5,000 of Chinese students. That's huge. And before the COVID-19 broke out, I visited a province like Newfoundland and Manitoba. And after the COVID-19, I had to stop those visits, but I made a lot of phone calls and attended a lot of webinars. So my impression is that people here, whether it's on the West Coast or East Coast, they would like to see more robust development of the relationship. They would like to see that the obstacle in the current relationship being removed. So I think I'm mostly encouraged by all those expressions. And I hope that they will speak even louder, when they're having this kind of debate in Canada about what kind of policy should be adopted towards China. So that's one of the impressions I got. And for the future cooperation, I think that's, as I mentioned, it's more space for our future cooperation, bilateral or multilateral, especially when we are encountering those unilateralism and the protectionism. For China and Canada, we stand together to uphold multilateralism and also to defend the international order underpinned by the international laws. So there's much we do together. Of course, we have to resolve the issue, and especially the Mengwanzhou incident, to make sure that we can tap into the great potential of our two countries. Thank you.
Okay, the next question will go to Mr. Neil Moss from the Hill Times.
Thanks for taking the question. Some parliamentarians have raised the need for Canada's House of Commons to label the persecution of Uyghurs as an act of genocide, as it did in the past when it unanimously voted to call the Rohingya killings a genocide. The Chinese government, as you have today, criticized Canada for interfering in internal Chinese affairs. Would a domestic recognition by Canadian parliaments of genocide against Uyghurs be met with the Chinese response?
First, I would like to make it clear, any actions that would damage our interests, especially our core interests, will be met with strong reaction. We will take resolute measures to safeguard our sovereignty, national security, and the development interests. And also, I would like to suggest those people here in Canada or elsewhere in some of the Western countries, they should be very careful when they are using the term genocide, because there's nothing like that happening in Xinjiang. For the Uyghur population, it has increased from 5.55 million back in 1978 to more than 12.7 million in 2018. And also for the 8 years between 2010 and 2018, the population of Uyghur population has witnessed a growth of 25%. That's about 2.5 million. And the growth rate is higher than that of the whole population in Xinjiang, and much higher than the growth rate of the Han group. So is it genocide? What actually happened in the United States, about the Native Americans because of the previous policy of assimilation, expulsion, and killing. The Native Americans, the number of them had nosedived from 5 million to just about 250,000. And that's genocide indeed. So I would like to draw your attention to the term of genocide, because there's nothing happening in Xinjiang. Actually, what's happening now is all the ethnic groups are living in harmony, and they enjoy the right to life, to development. And actually, when it comes to the religious belief, there are about 24,000 mosques, more than that in Xinjiang, 10 times of that in the United States. And when it comes to the average, it means that on average, one mosque for 530 people in Xinjiang. So that's an amazing number. Thank you.
To follow up on that, so more specifically, what would that reaction be when it is parliamentarians and not the Canadian government recognizing it?
I would like to suggest that, it's a speculative question still, but I strongly urge they are exercising caution when they are talking about anything that may damage our core interests. And you can see from what we have been responding to the United States, those forceful measures, resolute measures, I would refer them to look at this, which demonstrates our determination and the resolve to safeguard our national interests and security. Thank you.
The next question is Tonda Machaus from Toronto Star.
Good morning, Ambassador. Thank you for the news conference. I'd just like to loop back then, given your answers to several of the questions I've had and heard. Regarding your comments to my colleague, Bob Fife, about Hong Kong and Canada's consideration of making it easier for Hong Kong dissidents and refugees to enter Canada and to get protection here. It sounded to me like you were making a threat against the 300,000 Canadian passport holders and the businesses that do business there, as well as your answer to Neil Moss just now on the whatever Parliament might decide about the Uyghurs. So I'd like to understand, are you threatening the Canadian government with action directly against other individuals and Canadian businesses?
That's your interpretation. For us, I want us to make clear that a stable and prosperous Hong Kong SAR is not only in the interest of vast majority of Hong Kong residents, but it's also conducive to the majority of those foreigners, law-abiding foreigners and enterprises operating in Hong Kong. So I think what my message is that all those measures which are good, conducive to ensure Hong Kong's enduring stability and prosperity, that we should be supported by the people all over the world, if they really care about the well-being of the Hong Kong people and the stability and the prosperity in Hong Kong. Because I think last year, a great number of incidents happened, violent acts, which dealt a heavy blow to the rule of law, economy, and the social stability in Hong Kong. And that had been, kind of making people afraid of doing business or living in Hong Kong. But after the national security law had been in place for the past 3 months and a half, the Hong Kong is becoming more stable and safer. And that's good and encouraging news for all the people who would like to see Hong Kong remain stable. And thank you.
Thank you. My follow-up question is, many Canadians, as you see in that poll, are shocked and appalled at China's treatment of the Uyghurs and its actions in extending the law in Hong Kong, and its treatment of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. And many opposition parties, including other Canadians as well, are pressuring the government to take more action, including diversify trade with other Asia-Pacific partners beyond China. In other words, reduce any dependence on China that you might use as a lever against Canada. Can you address that concern? What do you say? What is your message?
First of all, when it comes to the treatment of the people in Xinjiang, I mentioned in a very clear term that all ethnic groups in Xinjiang and in China, they are living in peace, in harmony, and they enjoy their life. And their sense of happiness is at a very high level. The best, I think, in the history. Our human rights record are in the best time in history. And the Chinese people are in the best position to judge, to make comments on that. And just because of those rumors spread by the United States, some anti-China forces, and maybe some other countries, they are causing the people, general public, have a wrong impression of what's happening in China. So we encourage people to go to China to see for themselves what's happening in China. And when I talk to the people here in Canada, I found out most of the time, if the people, they have been to China, they will have a more objective and rational reading of China's development and the importance of China-Canada relationship. And for the two Canadian citizens, the situation, the treatment, the so-called mistreatment, I had made my position very clear. And also, I think for the doing business in China, it's not because we ask the Canadian side to do that. It is based on the market principle. So see that for a lot of Canadian enterprises being engaged in those business and the trade with China, they are doing that exactly to follow the market principles, not to follow the instructions from the Chinese side, because we are now, pursuing the market economy, of course, with our perspective, but it's a huge market with 1.4 billion people and a lot of skilled laborers. And more than that, it's more than 400 million consumers. They are in the middle income bracket. So the huge opportunities. And as our President Xi recently pointed out on several occasions, that we'll be pursuing a new development paradigm with the domestic circulation as the mainstay, but at the same time, with the domestic and the international circulations reinforcing each other. So it means that we'll have the development at a higher level, a high quality development. And that will be bringing more opportunities to Canadian enterprises, not only in the manufacturing sector, but also in the services sector. So there's a lot that Canadian government, I mean the Canadian business, they can do when it comes to the market access in China. And we are welcoming more high qualities and safe products from Canada. Thank you.
The next question, Mr. John Evenson from National Post.
Good morning, Ambassador. You've talked about a number of times about world peace, and yet this week President Xi was talking to Chinese troops. He said, to quote, "Focus your minds and energy on preparing to go to war." How could anybody interpret that other than as a threat to world peace?
You know that for us, of course, we are committed to a path of peaceful development, and that's enshrined in our constitution. No other country has done that. So it demonstrates our willingness and great determination to seek peaceful development, to seek friendly cooperation with any other country, as long as they would like to have this kind of relationship based on mutual respect and equal treatment. But of course, we have to be careful about our external environment. As you can see, in the South China Sea, generally speaking, it is stable with the joint efforts from China and ASEAN countries. But the United States is trying to make trouble in the region. And according to the news reports, for the first half of this year, the United States has dispatched about 3,000 times the military aircrafts into the South China Sea, which is a very dangerous maneuver, and it's undermining security and stability in the region. And also when it comes to Taiwan, the United States still sells advanced weaponry to Taiwan to trying to undermine our national security and sovereignty, which also poses great threat to the cross-strait relationship. So in light of all those dangerous maneuvers, we have to be careful and we have to be prepared for anything that imposes on us that would lead to our security being undermined. So for any responsible sovereign country, they are entitled to do that. That's only natural for our national defense forces to be engaged in this kind of preparation. But I think our policy is to seek peace and stability in the world. And we are contributing to that end, as we have sent more than 40,000 peacekeepers under the United Nations framework in recent years. And we are the one among the P5, the largest number in P5 to do that. Thank you.
Coming back to Canada, there is a new policy framework coming out from the Canadian government, which appears to be about to take a firmer hand with China. Are you concerned about the policies being proposed by the leader of the opposition, Ern O'Toole, and the apparent reaction in policy terms by the Trudeau government?
You know, for the Canadian domestic affairs, we won't comment on that. But when it comes to the China-Canada relationship, we would like to see that any review would be conducive to the long-term relationship, to the steady and the sound development of our bilateral relationship. Because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, a healthy and stable relationship is in the fundamental interests of our two peoples. So hopefully the people here will make rational judgment and will be proceeding from the overall interest of the people in Canada and to make wise decisions to do more things conducive to the sound development of the relationship, rather to the contrary. Thank you.
Now the last question, Mr. Yu Ruidong from China News Service.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for the opportunity for the last question. As we know, the 5th plenary session of the 19th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China will be held in later October. And one of its main agendas will be to discuss the proposals for formulating the 14th five-year plan and the future targets for 2035. So in your opinion, what kind of opportunities could China's development plan bring to Canadian businesses or companies? And I'd like to ask about the upcoming 3rd China International Import Expo, which will be held in early November. How about the current registration work for Canadian exhibitors, and how does it compare with the previous 2 years? Thank you.
As the 14th five-year plan now is still in the policy review, the process of that, but I'm confident that as the five-year plan, for the previous one, for the 13th five-year plan, we will chart the course for our economic and the social development and the development in all the other respects. And certainly we will usher in the new stage for development in China. The development at a higher level, a high quality development, a clean development. So it means a lot of opportunities for Canadian industries. Like here, Canada has its advantage in terms of clean energy, in terms of these biological, medicine industries, and also we can share a lot, on those when it comes to coping with climate change. And also, Canada here is renowned for its modern agriculture, for its financial sector, for all these kind of aerospace and aviation industry. So there's a lot of things we can do together. And for the 3rd China International Import Expo, CIIE in short, I think it demonstrates once again our commitment to opening even wider to the outside, because even against the backdrop of COVID-19, it will be held as it was planned in November in Shanghai. And one of the good news is that, as I have learned, although there's a great inconvenience caused by the COVID-19 for international travelers, but still a large number of Canadian companies have demonstrated interest in taking part of the event. So I think that people here, a lot of them, are still identifying the great opportunities for doing business in China. So I do wish them a very success in taking part in the CIIE and to expanding their access in the Chinese markets. And that's mutually beneficial to our two peoples. Thank you. And I would like to thank you all for attending today's event.
That's the end of today's press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Ambassador.